Chapter 1. Richard Thompson tried to get the attention of his fiancée, Jane Carter. She was on the couch again, still in her work dress, staring at the television with her half-finished dinner on her lap. Her skin had a deep tone from the self-tanner she used regularly. The face he loved lit up now and then with the light from the screen. She stood tall, about 5'9", and was more athletic than other women he knew, though he wasn't sure how she stayed that way. He thought she was just naturally fit, one of those people who looked great without much effort. She went to the gym, but not for weightlifting. She was toned, very toned. At least he thought his arms were a bit bigger than hers, but only by a little. To him, she was still stunning. They sometimes ran together, which Richard enjoyed. He always noticed how much better Jane was at it. She seemed to glide over the pavement, hardly making a sound. If she ever wanted him to run faster, she never said so. Instead, she made it easy for him. She matched his speed without a word, often taking smaller steps. When he sped up, she sped up too. When he slowed down, she slowed. She never raced ahead, leaving him behind. She never looked back with that bright, effortless smile that would say she was holding back. Only in little moments did the truth peek through. Once, their washing machine started leaking. Richard came home, expecting the usual chaos. A puddle on the floor, a worried call, and the machine stuck under the counter, too heavy to move alone. But this time, when he entered the kitchen, he found the machine already pulled out a bit. Not much, just enough to make a small opening behind it. The floor was dry. The toolbox sat open on the table, as if she had been waiting for him to help with his part. She stood there in leggings and an old t-shirt, her hair tied back, looking a bit annoyed instead of upset. "I didn't know what to do," she said, but it was clear that was not true. She knew exactly what to do and had already taken care of it. All she wanted was for him to come and make it official. Richard knelt down to look at the pipes and played along. He tightened a piece that probably didn't need it and said it was fixed. Jane kissed him on the cheek and thanked him like he had saved her, and together they pushed the machine back in, with him barely helping at all. Jane was not the type to show strong emotions. Richard was more likely to get teary over a sad movie than she was. She liked to be close and cuddle, but she didn't reach out for him like some women did. When she wanted to be close, it was often with a sense of urgency. She preferred to take control. It felt right for her. At first, Richard thought it was confidence. He saw it as a modern kind of freedom. But sometimes, when she looked at him with bright eyes, he felt she wasn't just enjoying herself. When it was over, she would relax in his arms with a sense of relief that felt deeper than simple happiness. "Darling?" he asked gently. "Jane?" No answer. He got up from his chair and moved next to her. Jane blinked a couple of times, noticing something had changed. "Jane!" he tried again. She turned to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Is everything okay?" he asked. The last few weeks had been a bit hard. Jane had sometimes seemed distant or angry, then loving, and then very affectionate, often all within minutes. "Yes," Jane said sharply, then sighed, realizing her tone was harsh. "Sorry, it's been a tough day, problems with a pension provider, just—" She trailed off with a shrug. "I'm sorry to hear that," Richard said, putting his arm on the back of the sofa, hoping Jane would lean against him. After a few seconds of clear hesitation, Jane settled in with what Richard hoped was a happy sigh. He wondered if tonight was a good time for this talk. Children. Both of his parents had passed away before he turned 22. His only close family member left, his uncle, died shortly after that, leaving him his nice flat in St. John's Wood where they lived now. Richard was worried about waiting too long. If he followed in his family's footsteps, living to 50 would be lucky. The worst thought was leaving children who still needed a father. He braced himself. He had to ask. "Jane," he started firmly, are you happy?" There was a pause. He felt her body tense a little, and she moved to the other end of the couch. He guessed this reaction was expected. Her family had money and a strong background, not the kind earned from hard work, but inherited wealth. Her mother had a title in her family history. Her father had built a strong business from numbers and courage. In fact, she worked for her father's company, mainly helping wealthy bankers increase their fortunes. Talking about feelings and happiness was probably not something she was used to. She took a deep breath and sat up straight, her hands resting in her lap. She held the band of her engagement ring with her thumb and index finger. "Honestly, yes, I know I've been a bit off Lately, but work has been tough, and I've had a lot on my mind. I understand why you're asking, and I'm sorry if I've been hard to deal with." She looked at him, searching for his reaction, but she didn't seem desperate for his forgiveness. "I just wondered," he swallowed hard, feeling the tension, "if you still wanted to be with me. I don't want you to feel pressured by me or anyone else. I know your parents are excited about our wedding." Richard shrugged. This felt like a crucial moment. "Of course I still want to be with you," Jane nearly shouted, irritation rising again, her whole body trembling with what Richard thought might be anger. With clear effort, she calmed herself. "I am happy, I promise," she said softly. "Okay," Richard said, letting out the breath he had been holding. "It's just, I mentioned not wanting to pressure you, but there's something I need to talk about. It's about us. I hope it's good, but I need to sort it out for my own peace of mind." Jane looked at him across the couch, still tense, but not the confident woman he thought he knew. "Children," she guessed correctly. Her distinct accent was more noticeable than the way she usually spoke at home. "Yes," Richard smiled shyly. He looked out the window and saw the floodlights from a nearby cricket match lighting up the sky over the field. "You know about what happened in my family, and I can't say I'll face the same issues as my parents, but I need to know that you still want that." He spoke slowly, trying to explain his fears. He talked about the future and about waiting until after the wedding. He said she was younger than him. He worried about being gone too soon if children still needed him. He knew she had a job and a career to build. He did not want to push her into a hard choice. His words wandered, but he hoped she understood. Jane stood very still. She did not move. For almost a full minute, Richard waited and watched her. Then she spoke. 5 years, she said. She asked if 5 years would be enough. Her voice was firm and careful, like she was making a serious deal. She turned toward him not to study his face, but because waiting for an answer felt easier that way. 5 years was longer than he hoped. Still, it was an answer. Jane would be 25 when they married. She was offering him her future. He would be 35. That felt fair to him. He felt calm. 5 years is perfect, he said, smiling with relief. Jane smiled back. It was the first real smile he had seen from her in weeks. She stood facing him. She stepped closer. The moment grew quiet and personal. Nothing more needed to be said. Her body felt like it was always a step ahead, eager and ready for what was next. He swallowed, feeling his mind go blank as she got ready for bed. "Come join me." She asked plainly, not in a flirty way, and reached out her neatly manicured hand. Richard took her hand and stood up. "Lead the way," he said. Chapter 2, working from home every day, had its ups and downs. The best part was not having to fight through the city with millions of others every morning and evening. Richard's commute was not the worst. He only needed to take a few simple stops on the Jubilee line and then walk less than 15 minutes. He felt pleased thinking about how he could avoid sharing the bathroom with Jane if he didn't have to. Many mornings he stayed in his pajamas and robe, took a run at lunch, then showered and dressed for work later in the day. He thought about his marriage. Overall, it was good. Jane was a caring wife, although she was busy. She worked hard and earned well. Usually, she made double what he did, but it changed depending on the whims of the very rich and how much they wanted to spend on feeling cared for. Jane preferred meeting clients in person instead of over video calls. She said it was important, a lesson from her dad, Terrence, which he confirmed when Richard asked him. "Most of the younger ones don't care," Terrence said casually, as if the fees they charged didn't matter. "If you give them a good return, they'll be happy, but the older clients, they need to feel special." Lunch at a nice restaurant usually does the trick, but they like to hold the paper in their hands while you tell them how much richer they have become compared to last year. Terrence chuckled at himself, knowing he was probably just as wealthy as his clients. With that, Richard decided he didn't need to dig any deeper into Jane's work habits. Her company website emphasized personal connections and face-to-face meetings, trust, honesty, and body language. Jane had once mentioned that people's attitudes about risk often didn't match what they said openly. One day, Terrence asked if Richard and Jane were planning to sell their place and move to a bigger one. Richard was surprised. Jane owned her own flat in their building, but she hardly used it. It mostly served as extra space for friends. They lived in Richard's flat. That's actually how he had met her. He had seen her struggling with a large plant in the tricky elevator and felt he should help. He invited her to dinner so she wouldn't be alone after the movers left. At that time, she didn't have much furniture. It was her first home, right after university. Richard knew that both their flats were worth a lot for what they were, but Terence had spoken as if they could easily find a large sum of money and buy a townhouse in an upscale area. Richard had done a bit of research and confirmed that wasn't possible, then tried to forget about it. He sighed and returned to his work, going through another set of C# code that Tom had asked him to fix. Tom wasn't his boss. They were both experienced members of the team, making sure that what got submitted was of good quality. Most of the team was quite nice. Richard had met with half of the people himself, but they disliked taking notes, and sometimes they struggled with their tasks. His instant messenger beeped. Tomby, hey Biscuit, is the trouble about today? Richty, hi Grave, yes and no, I'm good and she's in Cheshire looking for money until tomorrow, so I'm home alone. Tomby, got it. Want to grab a drink later? Richty, sure. Tomby, Dragon, 6 o'clock. Richty, see you there. Richard liked Tom, he was dependable. Tom was from the East End, but he had always been a bit wary of Jane. Richard thought it was because of their different backgrounds, which made sense. Tom's family had lived in a council flat like something out of a TV show, but they had bought it by the time he was born. Tom himself lived a good distance south of the river, so Richard appreciated that he was willing to come into town to catch up. Richard picked up his phone and texted Jane. How's everything? Meeting Tom for a drink later. Hope they're all signing up with you like good boys. Roman 20 in just a few minutes, Jane replied. Going well, thanks. 2 signed up, 2 more meetings today and 4 more tomorrow, crossed fingers. I'll be home late. Say hi to Tom for me and don't have too many drinks. XXX, Richard walked into the Dragon at a little past 6. Tom was already sitting at the bar. 2 pints were in front of him and an empty stool was next to him. Richard sat down. Evening. Hey, Rich, good to see you, buddy. You too, thanks. Richard took the pint Tom slid over. Cheers. Tom, as far as Richard knew, was not interested in dating. A girl at college had been unkind to him, and he hadn't really moved on from that. He didn't want to talk about women, so their chats usually stayed in the safe zones of music, sports, and with a hint of teasing, their jobs, even though they both enjoyed what they did. In the early days, Richard watched as Tom turned down many advances from women that Richard would have gladly taken a chance on. For a while, he believed that Tom was not interested in women at all. But that wasn't the case. Tom liked to keep his life neat and under control, and he thought women could complicate things. However, tonight felt different. Tom asked about Jane and then, after a moment, said something that surprised Richard. At your bachelor party in this very pub, you mentioned you and Jane would wait 5 years before having kids. I know you had your reasons for waiting, but she got you to agree to 5. It's been a month since your 6th anniversary. Tom looked directly at Richard. I don't know what's happening or if things have changed, but you've been quiet lately. You've missed a few nights you usually attend. I just wanted to check if you're okay. Richard felt like he was observing himself, speechless and confused, but also moved by Tom's care. Wow, Tom, I didn't even remember telling you that. I figured, Tom said, wiping his glass. I just wanted to make sure you were doing all right. Richard took a sip of his drink to buy some time. Tom was his best friend, but they often acted more like work colleagues. Perhaps that should change. I don't know, Richard said softly. There are challenges. All marriages have their ups and downs, but when it comes to kids, he sighed. I brought it up a few months after we hit 5 years. I knew nothing would happen unless I asked, so I sat her down and asked if she still wanted them. I reminded her we were past that 5-year mark and she understood my reasons. Tom nodded. And I didn't get the answer I was hoping for. Tom let out a small laugh. I can imagine. She started talking about work, building her client base. Richard shook his head. I knew she had a full schedule and we had enough work to get by, so I confronted her. I did it properly, stood my ground. Tom did not smile. She told me I didn't understand the pressure she was under. Some of her coworkers still see her as a favored child because of her dad. I said that was nonsense. Yes, he helped her get some clients, but she has earned at least half of them on her own. She is really good at her job. Tom said, still observing him. Eventually, I did what any husband would do. I told her we were at a point where we agreed to try for a family, and I wanted her to stick to that. Tom raised his eyebrows a bit. Richard could still picture Jane's face when he said it. She went completely quiet, Richard went on. She seemed really upset. I told her I couldn't believe she put work ahead of our happiness. She just said, "Your happiness," and ran to the bathroom and locked the door. "That doesn't sound good," Tom said. "No, it wasn't," Richard replied with a short, bitter laugh. "I tried to talk to her through the door. I asked if she had changed her mind about wanting kids, and if she had, why she never told me." There was no answer. I couldn't even hear her crying. Tom waited for him to say more. "I went to bed. She came out around 3 in the morning and sat on the edge of the bed. She said she was sorry. She said she did want kids, that she loved me, but she was scared of how quickly time passes." Richard looked down at his drink. "Then she said she would stick to the agreement we made." Tom frowned. "Wow. Yeah," Richard said. "I know I sound foolish, but when the person you care about says it like that, it feels like you're holding them to something they never fully wanted." "If you sound foolish, it's because you usually do," Tom said and leaned back. "But I understand. And I do care about her," Richard said. "But I can't shake the feeling that there are truths we're not sharing, like there's something being hidden." Tom paused. "Do you think she's not being honest?" Richard didn't reply immediately. "No," he said after some time. "If she was just trying to cover something up, I would have left by now." Tom looked puzzled. "That's kind of specific." Richard let out a brief, humorless laugh. "My parents were great at pretending everything was okay." Tom stayed quiet. "Mom told me not to worry when she got sick. 6 months later, she was gone. Dad said he'd be home by the weekend after a heart issue. He passed away an hour later." He took a deep breath. "I don't accept everything is fine. I don't do half-truths. If I can't trust someone's words, I'm already out." Jane understands that. Despite the weight of their talk, Richard caught the barmaid's eye and signaled for 2 drinks. "So," Tom said when they were alone again, "did anything else happen?" "Yes," Richard swallowed hard. "She stopped taking her pills and we tried for a couple of months." Tom sat quietly, waiting for more. "Then she started acting strangely," Richard said. "Not just a little moody, more like really upset than extremely angry. She broke a plate, then cried for hours. Then she was suddenly affectionate again, wanting to help me relax." Tom snickered. "Sounds pretty typical." Richard shook his head. "No, this was different. It wasn't regular or expected. It came out of nowhere. It was unsettling." "Thankfully, it only lasted about a month, then she returned to her usual self. And we continued trying," Richard added, "but she still hasn't gotten pregnant." "Got it," Tom said, taking a long sip. "Just out of curiosity. Did you 2 get close during that time?" Richard stared into space, trying to remember. "I can't really say. Things were moving so quickly. She'd be pulling me away before I could even catch my breath." Tom nodded slowly, thinking hard. Then he spoke carefully. "I hope this doesn't offend you, but do you think she might be seeing someone else?" Richard fumbled with his key at the door, giggling at himself as he missed the lock twice. Finally, it clicked and he stepped inside. The lights turned on automatically. By chance, he remembered he hadn't picked up the mail that day. Usually, Jane took care of it after work. He walked over to the mailboxes and struggled with the key again. Holding 3 envelopes, all of which seemed to need at least a quick look before being tossed, Richard dropped the rest into the junk mail bin provided by the property managers. 5 pints of lager might have been a bit too much, but he had enjoyed himself with Tom, even if the question about Jane's loyalty had made him laugh. They talked about West Ham for Tom's sake for nearly 45 minutes until Richard said he was done if Tom mentioned that amazing goal again. When they left the pub, Richard asked Tom if he wanted to stay at Jane's flat since it was in the same building and much closer than his own place. Tom declined and took the train in the other direction. Richard hiccuped and decided to take the stairs instead of the new lift that had been installed last year. "Gotta stay in shape," he said slowly as he tried to jog up the first flight, nearly tripping right away. Richard opened his flat door, tossed the mail on the kitchen table, and quickly went to the bathroom. After drinking a glass of water, he decided to check the letters. There was a notice about a fee increase. It seemed those junk mail bins had a cost. He found an invitation for a GP survey and a bank statement. He left everything on the table and went to brush his teeth. His phone buzzed with a text from Jane. "Hope you had a nice time and that you were sensible and that Tom was okay." Richard smiled. He replied, "I had a good time. I've missed going out. I've been a bit reclusive lately. We talked about you a lot. Good things, I hope." She texted back, "You bet," he replied, adding a smiley face. "Okay, sleep well, honey. See you tomorrow." "You too, see you tomorrow." Richard glanced at the "you bet" message, knowing it wasn't completely true. It bothered him a little, but he pushed it aside. The next morning, he felt a bit tired as he checked his phone. There was already a message from Jane from about 20 minutes ago. "Morning. Hope you're not feeling too bad. I should be home around 10 tonight." Richard blinked and typed back, "Not too bad, thanks. Hope you're okay, too. I forgot to ask about the other meetings yesterday. Hope they went well and good luck with today's." Not waiting for a reply, Richard got out of bed and walked to the kitchen, turning on the kettle. While he waited for it to boil, his eyes caught the bank statement he had ignored the night before. He frowned, recognizing the letterhead from Vale Private Banking. Confused, he walked over to grab it, thinking it might have been delivered by mistake. It seemed likely that one of his neighbors was so rich they could bank with someone like Vale Private Banking, a place that required £1 million just to open an account. His eyes widened. The letter was addressed to Jane Carter. His Jane, using her maiden name and the address of her flat, not his, where she always said her mail was sent. There was a letter included with the account statement. Richard read it with a growing concern. "Important account notice *, Dear Ms. Carter, you are receiving a paper copy of your account statement even though you prefer digital messages. Due to a recent issue affecting account access for a small number of clients, Vale Private Banking has decided to send paper statements to all customers for this reporting period as a safety measure. Your digital access is still available, and you don't need to do anything. I apologize for any trouble this may cause and appreciate your understanding. Please feel free to email me directly about any of your banking needs. My team and I are here to help. Yours sincerely, James Vale Collins, Chief Executive Officer, Vale Private Banking." He moved on to the statement and quickly looked at the 15 outgoing transactions. Most were only numbers with no other details. The amounts were usually in the low hundreds, rounded to the nearest £5 or £10. The only name listed as a payee was Helix CONS. This name appeared 4 times, once a week. Each transaction had a different invoice number and a steady payment of £1,200. At the bottom of the statement, there was a very large incoming transaction, but his attention was on the balance below it. £2,548,966.45. Wow. Chapter 3. Jane smiled as she shook hands with both the Premier League football player and his agent. Another £5 million signed and under management. This trip had been hugely successful. Yesterday had brought her a lot of satisfaction. All 3 client meetings resulted in new business, with 2 more scheduled for today. Maybe even another 2 if things went well. As the 2 men left the conference room, Jane reviewed the signed documents and began to enter details into her laptop. There was a lot of work ahead. Administration, planning, compliance, all keeping her quite busy. After that, she checked her work phone to make sure nothing would affect the meetings later. Then she grabbed her personal phone to see if Richard had sent anything and to give herself a quick break. There was a message from Richard. She smiled. She really cared for him now, but it hadn't always been that way. When he proposed, and even when they got married, he felt more like a friend she relied on, someone to show the world that she was doing okay. It helped ease her mother's growing concerns and showed her clients a sense of stability and respect. She opened the chat, her eyes glancing over the message. "Can you explain why you have £2.5 million in a bank account you've never mentioned to me?" She paused. This was surprising and not good. She knew that if Richard found out she was not honest, he would end things. She had been hiding things from the start of their relationship, but somehow she had managed to keep everything together over the years. She had always told herself that the lies were about the situation, not her feelings. That difference was important to her. But today, something had changed, and she felt uneasy. This account had been around since she graduated, when her father gave her money for her flat. Even though she didn't have enough to open an account with Vale back then, they accepted her as a client because of a favor from Terence Carter. Taking a deep breath, she locked the door to her room and sat quietly to focus. She tried to convince herself that she could explain the account and the money. She had it for many years, even before she met Richard. She put around 90% of her income into this account, while the rest went into her regular Lloyd's account that Richard knew about. She did this because even that 10% was more than Richard earned, and putting in more felt wrong to her, like showing off. The money was nice, but it wasn't the most important part of their life together. She worried it might create unnecessary tension in their relationship, as if Richard's hard work didn't matter when it truly did. One day, she hoped they could use the money for something special together, maybe a trip to New York or even a fancy boat. Most of that was true. That was the safest way to think, and even though he would be upset for not sharing this part of her life, she felt she could explain the account without lying further. The real concern was how much he knew. Did he know about her payments? If he did, how could she explain that? She frowned as these thoughts swirled in her mind. Telling him the truth felt too big and too frightening. She needed a story for them. A business-related excuse was the obvious choice. Some payments were too large for a simple business lunch or a hotel stay. Plus, she had a company credit card that Richard knew about, but she could say her card had been declined. She could claim the payments were for her father, loans from long ago. This was believable and hard to check. She'd have to be cautious when managing Richard around her father for a while, just in case he asked about it. Daddy did like to talk about money, after all. Her mother wished he wouldn't. Ah, that's it. Mummy could handle that for her. No more money talk at home, Terrence? Even if Richard asked, it would be a firm no. That could work. Charity donations were another good idea. There was so much money at stake. What was £500 to a charity like Battersea Dogs Home or Great Ormond Street Hospital? All right, she told herself, taking a deep breath to regain her calm. This was manageable. With her crisis internally under control, she moved to the next set of questions. How did he find out? Was he looking into it? She knew Richard would be very thorough if he felt tricked. She read his text message again. No, this was a specific issue that had occurred. She leaned down to open her laptop bag and took out the hidden pocket made for a second phone. She turned it on and noticed many messages coming in, but ignored them as she opened the Vail private banking app. There was a message in the app inbox. Computer problems, it read. Paper statements were sent to her home. Vail private banking. She considered switching accounts, but Daddy would know right away if she did, and she didn't want him involved in her affairs any more than he already was. She glanced at her watch. It was midday. She turned off the third phone and put it away. Taking a few deep breaths, she entered Richard's number from memory instead of checking her contacts. "Hello, Mrs. Croesus," Richard answered with a hint of sarcasm. "I was wondering when you'd call." She knew he would be defensive and easily annoyed. He often was when he felt left out, but she had hoped he would listen without overreacting. "Hi, Richard, I wanted to talk," she said gently. "Don't call me that," Richard shot back. "Whatever I am, I'm not your darling. Maybe I'm just someone you use, but I'm definitely not someone you love." This was going to be a tough talk, but Jane felt she had the answers. He just needed to listen. "Okay, I get it. I made a mistake and I want to take responsibility. Can I speak, or do you just want to yell at me?" It was partly true. She just wasn't ready to admit the part that mattered. She waited for a reply, noticing Richard's heavy breathing on the line. After a moment, she continued. She explained where the account had come from and why she hadn't shared it with him. It wasn't exactly a secret, but she thought it would help their relationship feel more balanced. As she expected, Richard was not happy. "Honestly, Jane, do you really think I'm so insecure that I couldn't handle knowing you earn a lot of money? I get your reasoning, but it doesn't make sense. We're married, not just friends. We should know these things about each other. What if something happened to you? That account would still be there for years." "It's in my will," Jane said before she could stop herself. She remembered this clearly. Another line crossed, something that couldn't be undone. "Do you have your own agreement now? What about the one we made together?" Richard sounded shocked and hurt. "It's just about this one thing, like a note from my side, so there wouldn't be any doubt if something goes wrong." She spoke hesitantly. Richard sighed, his fight seeming to fade for a moment. "Well, I guess I should be grateful that you're not completely lost, even if I need to rethink a lot about our marriage." "Yes, I'm sorry. I see how foolish this seems now," Jane said, trying to make the most of what felt like a break in the tension. "But truly, I thought I was doing the right thing for both of us, not just for myself. I love you and care about you, even though I understand why you might doubt that." There was a brief silence, and Jane thought she heard some papers rustling on Richard's side. "So what are these payments? What is Helix Cons, anyway?" She began to explain, going through her prepared story about the loan from her father, which Richard responded to with a grunt. She decided to add a little to her story. He probably won't even recall it, it's such a small amount for him. She caught herself downplaying the money and tried to steer her words back, hoping that if Richard asked her father about it before she could get her mother to enforce their agreement not to discuss money, it would go smoothly. You're paying $1,200 a week. That's not a small amount, $5,000 a month. Wow. Well, the apartment was pricey. She tried to justify the lie. I hope you aren't paying interest on it, Richard said firmly. If you are, I would insist that you pay it off right away. In fact, I don't understand why you haven't already. Owing anyone money, even family, if you don't have to, seems like a bad idea to me. Jane sighed. It sounded like she had given up, but really it was more about feeling relieved. You're probably right. I'll talk to him about it. Richard, thankfully, accepted her excuses for the other payments without asking more questions. She mentioned that she liked to make her donations anonymously through a third-party service, so it was all just account numbers. Eventually, Richard seemed to have enough of it all. Fine, I'm not happy, I really am not. I need to think things over. Don't expect me to be friendly tonight. We have a problem, there's no trust. And to think, yesterday Tom asked me if I had thought about whether you were being unfaithful. I laughed at him. I'm not laughing now. With that, he hung up. Jane stared in shock at her phone, then sighed sadly, but as so often happened, no tears came. Chapter 4, Richard went for a run. Sometimes running helped clear his mind, especially when he had been staring at a difficult problem for too long. Today, though, it only made him more frustrated. How much of his life was built on a lie? What did she think of him? He was so lost in his thoughts that at one point he ran right into the street in front of a taxi, the driver honking and shouting that he was being foolish. Richard wondered if he was right. After his shower, he sat at his desk and called Tom. Hey, buddy, this feels serious, Tom said. It is, I guess. Are you alone right now? Richard asked. Yeah, doing work from home today. Richard took a deep breath, which was harder than it sounded. You know, I laughed yesterday when you asked if I thought Jane was seeing someone else. Yeah, I'm glad you found it funny. I just had a feeling something was off. You know me. It seems like women always make things complicated, Tom replied with a sigh. Well, she might not be unfaithful, but she did keep something from me. A lot of something. I found out by chance. Richard explained about the bank account, Jane's hidden money, and her earnings. Tom let out a low whistle. Jane makes over $1 million a year. Much more, closer to 1.5, even though she's been telling me she's been making about 1/10 of that during our whole marriage. Richard's voice showed his disbelief. Wow, Rich, Tom said quietly. There are also these payments, Richard continued. One is to something called Helix Cons, which she says is a loan for her dad. There are others too, just numbers that look like secret charity donations. It sounds unbelievable, like I'm in a dream and will wake up to find my wife is just very wealthy. He gave a short, bitter laugh. Richard could hear Tom thinking as he took a moment before asking, So what are you thinking? What do you mean? Well, are you going to talk to her, accept what she says, and enjoy being a multimillionaire, or what? Tom paused, making it feel like a big decision. I could probably tell you more than you'd expect if you give me half an hour. Richard closed his eyes. He and Tom worked for a big bank. He could use his resources to look into it, but he knew it might alert security. You do know that's not exactly legal, right? Richard said. Of course it's not legal, Tom said, but it's easy, no one will find out. What about Helix Cons? Richard asked. You mean the loan payment to her father, Tom explained. Yes. Helix Cons will be a name for a real business, Tom said. If it's real, that's fine. If not, I will figure it out quickly. Tom's excitement was building now, just like it always did when he was close to solving a puzzle. Richard chuckled. I didn't know you were into this stuff, buddy. It makes sense, though. You're a bit of a loner and your style isn't the best. Very charming, Tom replied, smiling. But yes, I know what I'm doing. Our security team looks for patterns, not just one-time events. I can keep it clean. Richard had no response to that. Do you want me to take a look? Tom asked. Richard took a deep breath. He felt like he was at a turning point. Was he ready to move forward? Did he need to? Was Tom trying to stir things up and complicate his marriage? It could be something small, or it could have much bigger consequences. Let me see how things unfold, okay? Richard said. I know it seems like I'm backing out, but I'm still upset. I want to decide when I'm thinking clearly. Sure, Tom agreed. I'll get everything ready. It gives me something to keep busy with. I'll wait for your call on whether to proceed or not. There was a short pause. Want to grab a drink later? Yeah. Dragon. It was past midnight when Richard finally got back to the apartment. He knew Jane had been there. The letter and statement from her secret account were gone from the kitchen table. It didn't matter. He had several pictures of them on his phone and in the cloud if he needed them. He had even sent them to Tom after their fourth drink, just in case. But really, it just made it easier to say yes when the moment came. He walked into the kitchen and drank a big glass of water. Then he had another. He would be awake all night, but he hoped it would lessen his hangover. Struggling his way to the living room, he fell sideways onto the couch. He noticed that his phone had been buzzing with texts and calls while he was with Tom, but honestly, he didn't care at all. Most of the messages were from Jane. To his surprise, he even saw a missed call and a voicemail from Annabelle, Jane's mother. Jane must have been really worried to involve her. Good. Deciding he was too drunk to handle it now, he wondered where his wife was and opened their chat, just in case she had sent something important. He skimmed through the messages without really focusing until he reached the last one. He squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the words. Ah, there was one from about an hour ago. She was at her own apartment, giving him space. She said he could come over if he wanted. Well, he didn't want to. As he lay there, it finally hit him that Terrence probably thought Richard knew how much money Jane earned. Why else would he have brought up a fancy townhouse when they talked about living arrangements? That thought alone seemed important. Richard yawned and fell asleep on the couch, still in his clothes. Jane sat at the kitchen table across from her husband, trying to steady herself. She sat up straight, dressed as if she were meeting a client. Her hair was tidy and her skin was tanned. She felt a strong urge inside her. She knew she could deal with it today, even though it was pushing at her mind and stomach. But she was also feeling very emotional. Even though she was ready, she knew that things could still get out of hand. They each had a cup of coffee, the steam rising between them like a wall. Richard looked tired. Dark circles under his weary eyes and a pale complexion made him seem older. He slumped like someone who had been worn out by worry about her. He had every right to feel that way. Despite his tidy clothes and hair still wet from his shower, she could smell the leftover alcohol from the night before. She knew she was the reason for his state. So, Richard started, staring into his coffee cup. I need you to be completely honest with me now. You've kept too many secrets. Some of them might make sense to you, but they have put our trust in a difficult place. Right now, I'm not sure I really know you. I can't tell what parts of our life are real and what aren't, or rather, which things you've chosen to keep from me. He looked up at Jane, his hazel eyes dull. And you know how important honesty is to me, Jane. I can't forgive lies. His voice was flat, showing no emotion. Let me be clear. If you love me, you have to tell me the truth. If you don't love me, then what's the issue with being honest? Jane took a breath, ready to give her usual answer, but Richard raised a hand to stop her. One more thing, I need you to get this straight. I can find out about those payments very quickly. I can learn about Helix cons. I don't want to do that. But I will if I think you aren't being honest with me. And if I find anything you haven't shared right now, we're finished. No matter how much that hurts. He paused, and Jane opened her mouth again. She had hoped that when Richard messaged her this morning and asked her to come over, everything would feel normal again. She wished he could set aside his need for the truth and accept the things she had said, even if it made him unhappy. She knew the lies she had told the day before wouldn't stand up to any questions. He could find out, or he might know someone who could help him. His job would let him access the information, even the tools to dig deeper. He would be breaking rules and putting his work at risk, and that was not what she wanted for him. She would rather admit everything than see that happen. For a brief moment, she almost told him the truth. She pictured herself saying the words out loud and letting them fall where they might. She imagined his shock, his eyes fixed on her with an anger she would never forget. It would have been clearer, but it would cost her something she was not willing to lose. So for now, she reached for one last carefully crafted half-truth, trying to steer the conversation and keep her secret safe. It might still be enough to make Richard leave her, but her true feelings would remain hidden. She lowered her head, looking remorseful. I'm really sorry, she started. I didn't want to admit this. I thought, along with everything else, it would be too much for you. This is very embarrassing for me, but I did mislead you about those payments. She noticed Richard adjusting in his chair, sitting up straighter and listening closely. A small spark of hope rose in her. Maybe this would work. You wanted honesty, so I will tell you the truth about the accounts in the statement. They are mostly payments to an escort service. Helix Consultancy is their official name, but if you looked closer, they actually work as NDA Executive Escorting. There it was, the truth. She glanced up from beneath her lashes, watching his reaction. His eyes were wide. Even though he had some concerns, maybe even about cheating, he was clearly trying to understand what she had just told him. All of them? He stammered. Her confidence grew quickly. Now came the part where she could slip up. She hoped he was still too shocked to catch any mistake. She sighed dramatically. It's more of a side job, really. Some of my women clients are either single or stuck in unhappy marriages they can't easily leave. Some look for companionship. Others want to get back at someone. She shrugged. One of my roommates at university did this kind of work to help pay for her studies. She was beautiful and earned a lot. She told me she knew a few men who had trouble finding women to date. They were straight, but most of their clients were older men. I didn't think much of it then. She paused for a moment, then went on. Not long after I started at my new job, I met with a woman director at a bank. I had never met her before. She took a personal call from her husband and had a loud argument with him right in front of me like I wasn't even there. Jane stopped and took a sip of her coffee. Her reasoning still felt strong. Richard remained quiet, his face serious now instead of just shocked. She hung up, looked at me like we were old friends sharing secrets, and said, "That guy is with another young woman. He just asked me for $10,000 for a trip for the two of them to the Maldives." Jane shook her head slightly. I laughed at the silliness of it and said, jokingly, "Back in college, I knew a couple of good-looking guys who wouldn't mind if you paid them for help." It was just a joke, but she looked at me like she was really thinking about it. She wanted to know how private they were and how much they would charge. She swallowed hard. I called my old roommate. She gave me the details of one guy she still knew. He told me to keep it private, and it just grew from there. She paused and waited. "So you're saying," Richard said slowly, "that you're what? A middleman? I can see why you'd think that," Jane replied calmly. "But not really. I set things up, handle payments, and tell people when and where to meet. It gives wealthy women a way to stay out of sight. And yes, it has helped my career." Richard rubbed his head. The story was so strange that it almost seemed real. There was enough truth in it to make the rest believable. That seemed to be Jane's style. He was sure some of it was true, but some of it felt off. This story, if it was one, was a strange one. She wasn't saying she was a victim or a hero. She was simply saying that she helped arrange things. Compared to everything that had gone through his mind since yesterday, how much worse could it be? Just as he opened his mouth to ask, Jane spoke first. "Before you ask, no, I haven't. I'm married to you. I'm faithful to you." Her eyes met his, then glanced at the kitchen clock. Richard's expression changed into a frown. "Don't give me a story," he said. "Give me facts." Jane blinked once as if she didn't understand. "Richard, facts," he repeated. "Names, numbers, dates. Why it's always 1,200 every week. Why it's the same every time." "I can't," she said quickly. "It's confidential. If I give you details, I might get in trouble." Richard looked at her. "Jane," he said firmly, "you're already in trouble." She tried to speak again, but no words came out. He took out his phone, unlocked it, and pushed it across the table towards her. "I have copies of everything," he said. "If you lie to me now, I will find out, and when I do, we are finished." Jane's fingers hovered over the phone, not touching it as if it might shock her. Richard leaned in closer. "One chance," he said. "Tell me what Helix is, tell me what you have been paying for, tell me what you have done." Jane held his gaze for a long time. She seemed calm, but that calmness faded. "I'm sorry," she said. Richard's face grew serious. "I can't live with this. I don't care about the money or your other work. What matters is this." He tapped the picture on the phone. "The problem is that I don't know when you're being honest." He took some deep breaths. He had already made his decision. "Leave," he finally said. "Just go. I don't want to see you again." Jane nodded once. She understood. She should have been crying, but in this terrible moment, her eyes were dry. Chapter 5, Richard did end up talking to Jane's mother on the phone. He told her that he and her daughter needed to part ways. There were too many secrets and too much hidden from a husband who deserved more. The lies and promises broken left him in a tough spot. Annabelle, to her credit, sounded very sad but not really surprised. She seemed more shocked that the marriage had lasted as long as it did rather than that it had ended. He also talked to Tom, who admitted that he had already looked into everything. Names and addresses for every account on the statement were a mystery, along with who or what Helix Cons really was. "Not sure it will help now," Richard said, "and didn't I ask you to wait?" "Yeah," Tom answered, "but I was bored. It filled 20 minutes. Despite everything, Richard chuckled. "Whatever happens," he said, "don't let me get on your bad side." Richard started going into the office more and spending time with his coworkers. Most of them were men, and the few women often got asked out in an awkward way. Richard respected himself enough not to join in, but he noticed. As for Jane, he didn't know much. The divorce went smoothly. He filed for unreasonable behavior, saying they were not a good match and that she was often away from home. Jane agreed without arguing. He imagined she probably found it easier than facing the truth. She kept saying he should take half of her money. He resisted for 2 weeks before finally agreeing. His lawyer suggested he could give it to charity if he really didn't want it, but saying no would only drag things out. Jane's father did not bother him, which Richard appreciated. He thought Terrence might be unaware of Jane's other life but expected some tough questions, especially since her job was mentioned in the divorce papers. Maybe Annabelle had stopped that from happening. Richard continued running. There were no more problems with taxi drivers. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. Still, he worried about how long he would live. At 37, how much time did he really have left? No wife, no girlfriend, and no realistic hope for children now. That thought kept coming back to him. At night, when he lay alone in bed, he missed the comfort of Jane's presence. He thought about her smile and the little details that made her who she was. On the day the divorce was finalized, he looked at his bank balance, which showed almost £2 million. He stared at the number for a long time and then let out a laugh. It felt almost funny. Maybe he needed a financial advisor. A couple of weeks later, on a Friday afternoon, Tom leaned over his computer screen and called Richard over. Thinking it was a technical problem, Richard took out his earbuds and wheeled his chair to Tom. "Look at this," Tom said, pointing at his screen. It was a webpage from Carter Wealth Management, marked with a notice that it wasn't supposed to be shared for another 2 months. "How did you get this?" Richard asked. "You don't ask, I don't tell," Tom replied, tapping his nose. "You didn't see it from me, right?" Richard laughed and looked back at the screen. The page showed a standard business photo of Jane along with an article saying that Jane Carter, not Thompson, would be opening a new branch of CUM in New York City. Her UK clients were being informed that she could no longer be their advisor and that she was preparing to practice in the United States. "Wow," Richard said, running a hand through his hair. "Yup," Tom agreed. "Good for her, I guess," Richard mumbled, though he wasn't really sure how he felt. The divorce should have been the end, but this news seemed to change that. The little healing he had started after his marriage ended felt raw again. "I wish you hadn't shown me that," Richard said as he moved back to his desk. "You don't really mean that," Tom replied with a grin. "You just want me to feel down enough to join you for a drink later." "True, I admit it," Richard laughed. When Richard finally got home, much later and feeling quite cheerful, he was halfway up the stairs when he remembered he needed to check the mailbox. It was something he often forgot, even when he was sober. After years of Jane handling it, he found it hard to change the habit. But that day, he'd had a few drinks, just like he had now. He opened the mailbox, tossing aside colorful flyers and keeping a few envelopes. Looking at the stairs, he thought taking the lift would be easier. Once he was in the flat, instead of heading to the kitchen for some water, he wandered into the living room and set the mail on the sofa. He poured himself a generous drink from his last bottle of good whiskey and raised the glass. "To Jane, and good luck," he said, lifting the glass toward the window where Lord's was not far away. What a silly thing to do, he thought as he sipped. He picked up the envelopes from the sofa, but one slipped from his grasp and fell between the cushions. He didn't even notice as the room swayed and he felt the urge to find the bathroom. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson." The receptionist spoke with a New York accent, her bright white smile standing out. "Please go through and have a seat. Dr. Reynolds will be with you soon." Jane followed her direction and sat in a cozy chair, lost in her thoughts, which often circled back to Richard. "Hello, Jane." Dr. Freya Reynolds entered the room, a middle-aged woman with a friendly demeanor that Jane found oddly familiar. Then it hit her. Freya smiled widely as she spoke. I've got some results. Some are good, some are odd, and a few are very unusual. Jane nodded, ready to hear more. Freya looked at a paper and said, We have answers about your muscle mass and other signs. Your body makes higher levels of androgens, mainly testosterone. At the same time, your progesterone levels are low, even during your monthly cycle. Jane recalled bits of this from her biology lessons and the prenatal classes she had attended. There are no promises, Freya continued softly, but I believe these hormone patterns could explain the feelings you've struggled with for a long time. Jane leaned back in her chair as Freya carefully folded the paper and placed it on the desk. First, she said gently, I want you to understand this clearly because it's important. Jane looked at her. No matter what choices you've made or what you feel ashamed of, Freya said while tapping the paper, it means you haven't been imagining things, you haven't been weak, you aren't broken in the way you might think. Jane felt a tightness in her stomach. Could this really be fixed? She didn't want to get her hopes up. For a long time, Freya explained, your body has been more intense than it should be. It has been louder and more urgent in ways most people don't experience. When hormones act like this, they can affect more than just your mood. They influence how you control your impulses, manage your emotions, feel anxious, and even how you sense pain. She paused, watching Jane closely. I'm not saying biology excuses your actions, she added, but it helps explain why trying to push through it has not worked before. Jane blinked back tears. It was overwhelming, all of this hitting her at once. From a single sheet of paper held by someone who oddly reminded her of the landlady from a local pub, though they spoke very differently. So, Freya said, leaning back a bit, this is how we will handle things, step by step, with care and support. She raised one finger. First, we will stabilize your health. We'll repeat your blood tests, check your adrenal glands, and make sure everything is all right structurally. Assuming nothing odd comes up, which I don't expect, we will start by lowering androgen activity and adjusting your progesterone levels. This should help reduce the physical urgency. It won't take away all desire, but it should lessen the constant pressure. Jane nodded. Quiet seemed unfamiliar, almost scary. Second, Freya continued, raising another finger, we need to look at what living like this for 20 years has done to your mind. Jane's mouth tightened. I suggest seeing a psychologist, Freya said directly. Someone experienced with patterns of behavior, not someone who will judge you or push you to share things just for the sake of sharing. Jane offered a faint, humorless smile. That sounds comforting. This won't be focused on relationships, Freya clarified. Not mainly. It will be about how you learned to connect with others, what it kept you safe from, and what you gave up in the process. She paused, then softened her tone. I want to be honest about something else, too. When the physical symptoms start to ease, you might feel worse before it gets better. Feeling sad or anxious and a sense of emptiness is common. You have been living under a certain way of life for a long time. I'm afraid I won't know who I am without it, Jane admitted quietly. Freya nodded, understanding. That's why you won't be doing this on your own, she said. I'll handle the medical side and work with your psychologist so we're on the same page. If anything becomes too much, just let us know. We can adapt. Our goal is to help you live without what you've called the need influencing all your choices. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. And Jane, she continued, I'm truly sorry you've had to deal with this alone for so long. No one should have to shape their life around a pain they can't quite understand. Jane's calmness wavered a little. She looked down at her hands. I hurt people, she said softly. Freya met her eyes. Yes, she replied gently, and that is something you'll need to accept. They sat in silence for a moment. Freya tapped her computer. Finally, she stood, indicating the appointment was over. My office will reach out to you with some referrals, she said. Try to take today for yourself. Chapter 6. Jane waited alone in the psychologist's office. The woman was late. As usual, she felt restless. Underneath it all, a worry grew inside her, a dull, constant ache. Her body had always shown signs of strength. Tall and fit, she had the kind of build that seemed almost sculpted. She went to the gym, but not like the other women. She didn't train for strength, she just had it. Muscle came naturally to her, as if her body had evolved differently from most. In many ways, it felt like it was already too late for her to change, but she knew she needed to learn to manage it. She recalled the time she tried hard to become pregnant. Those 2 months felt like the toughest time in her life. Eventually, she reached her breaking point. The feelings overwhelmed her. Deep sadness, anger, heartache. One emotion blended into another without warning. She found it impossible to connect with Richard while caught in this turmoil. The comfort he offered couldn't change how she felt, no matter how much she wished it could. This struggle had followed her since she became a teenager. A discomfort that would come and go throughout the month. It was annoying and sometimes even frightening. Some days it hurt deep in her stomach. Other days it caused headaches so intense that even a little light was too much to handle. Annabelle thought it was normal, just part of growing up as a girl, something all young women went through. Jane didn't agree. What she felt was too strong and too consistent to be just that. None of her friends seemed to deal with it in the same way. After visiting the hospital and having tests that showed nothing wrong, she stopped going back. People thought she was pretending. She also stopped talking to her mother about it. Whatever was happening with her felt personal and risky, and she didn't have the confidence or the right words to ask for more help. She was too young to demand answers and too scared of what might happen if she did. Sports should have been a way for her to let off steam. From a young age, she was naturally talented. Not just from practice, but she excelled right away, which sometimes embarrassed her. She ran faster than most boys, jumped further, and hit harder. Strength came to her easily, and her body built muscle without her trying. At first, her teachers were thrilled. Coaches admired her. She won medals and certificates that she didn't really care for. As she got older, the focus on Jane changed. Her achievements started to make her feel uneasy instead of celebrated. Other girls stopped inviting her to join in, and the boys could not stand being outperformed by her. They often reminded her that she wasn't supposed to be stronger than them. Jane picked up on this quickly. She pulled back during competitions, missing chances to win and letting others take the lead. It felt easier to be in the background than to stand out. It was simpler to smile and apologize for being skilled than to explain how she was. By her mid-teens, she still played sports like netball, athletics, hockey, swimming, and riding, but without the drive she once had. She did what was needed but nothing more. Her body continued to grow stronger, whether she wanted it to or not, but she hid that too. She wore long sleeves and loose clothes, pretending not to care about competition. This was something else she learned to manage quietly and keep hidden so she could be left alone. The years went by like this. School became something to survive rather than succeed in, and she struggled with pain and tiredness that she could not explain. The discomfort only grew as she got older. By the time she finished her A-levels, her grades were decent, but not enough for the top universities. She decided to take a year off to find a way to cope. After leaving school at 18 and feeling less noticed, everything changed. She traveled around Europe with a friend who did not want to go to university. They spent their parents' money on a short adventure. Away from home, she found freedom and began to explore new things. With this exploration came new insights. The feelings didn't fade away with age, they only became more intense. What had once been only discomfort started to feel like something else, a confusing mix that made it harder to ignore and even tougher to manage. When she found relief, it was clear and real, even if only for a moment. For the first time, the next day felt bearable. She didn't try to make it more than it was. She didn't enjoy it like others might. It was about getting through, not about pleasure. Once she realized that, she sought it out carefully and without emotion. But the results came quickly, no matter how careful she and her partners were. When she missed a second cycle, she went home and told Annabelle just the essentials. She mentioned being careless and that their protection had failed. Annabelle reacted as expected. She was shocked and upset, but also practical. She agreed to help Jane handle it quietly. At the clinic, a female doctor took longer than Annabelle wanted. She watched Jane closely, paying attention to details that most would overlook. During the checkup, she asked if Jane was taking any supplements or hormones, anything she hadn't mentioned. Jane answered truthfully, she wasn't. The doctor looked uncertain, not really accusing, but as if she had seen this before and was surprised to find it here. She asked again, gently, giving Jane a chance to clarify without feeling ashamed. Annabelle, anxious and on edge, put a stop to it. This was not the right time for questions, she said. They were there for a specific reason, and she wanted it to be handled simply and without extra complications. Her way of speaking left no room for disagreement. The doctor agreed. Jane left with a private prescription for birth control pills. It was the only real benefit from the tough experience. Even that was tightly controlled. For several months after, Annabelle kept a close watch on Jane, limiting her freedom so much that the prescription seemed almost useless. Within days, the headaches returned. The stomach pain followed, and unlike before, the need was always there, demanding attention. Whatever had been held back was now very loud. Cambridge should have been out of reach, but Terence thought differently. A special entrance exam was set up. To have any chance, Jane knew she had to manage her feelings, whether her mother approved or not. She often vanished at night, went to clubs, pretended to be an innocent socialite, and always attracted attention. With her needs usually met, she could focus and study. She excelled in the exam and started her degree just a year later than planned. To everyone else, she looked like a perfect student. Her studies were her top priority. Only one or two of her roommates knew how active her social life was, and they were happy to keep it a secret, supported by the generous allowance from her father and her willingness to share it. While at Cambridge, Jane decided she needed to do something about the blush that often appeared on her face. Most people thought it was just a rosy glow from country living with too much time outdoors. But some looked at her differently, with curiosity, with a hint of doubt, as if they sensed that it was not just the weather or exercise, but something else her body was trying to show. She jokingly brought it up once with her roommate, who suggested trying a fake tan. This led to a funny evening filled with wine, where they both ended up looking silly and laughing in the bathroom mirror. Over time, Jane practiced and improved. She learned to even out her skin tone and tone down the color on her cheeks. This gave her some control over how people viewed her. After graduating, she received a high honor and was happily welcomed into Carter Wealth Management, or CUM, as their newest advisor. Having a job meant she earned her own money, and she earned a lot. This made it easier to manage her needs more discreetly. She began using private agencies that provided services for people like her. It worked well. The men were careful, respectful, and skilled, and they only asked for what was necessary. The lack of emotional ties made a big difference. Sometimes she felt relief from this for an entire day or even longer. There were a few men she liked to see again, and with them she arranged payments directly in a quiet, efficient way. This not only saved money but also made everything simpler. That was her last untruth to Richard. She wasn't the broker, she was the buyer. Tanning also became unnecessary. She found a salon in Kensington she liked, where they were discreet and efficient and nobody asked questions. The results were always great. Consistency was important to her. She wanted to control how the world saw her. Then, about 9 months into her job at CUM, she made a mistake. After enjoying a little too much wine, her caution faded. She ended up spending time with an older man who was a client of her father's and a family friend. He was very rich and used to getting what he desired. He was married, but that didn't bother him much. He decided he wanted Jane as his secret partner. His wife had accepted this kind of situation, as long as it kept him busy and away from her. Jane did not want to catch feelings, but she liked the nice things that came with it: jewelry, clothes, and a luxury hotel suite whenever she wanted. It was easy and flattering for her. This arrangement continued until his wife found out who he was seeing and went straight to Jane's mother. Annabelle was furious. It wasn't the affair that upset her. Affairs were common where she lived, as long as they were quiet and discreet. What worried her was the chance of a scandal. Jane was building her own career, and her father's business relied on a good reputation. He had money but not a strong family name. A story like this, misunderstood by the wrong people, could damage them all. Jane felt she might be scolded during her mother's angry speech. She managed to escape by promising it would not happen again and that she would avoid making any reckless decisions. This is where Richard entered the picture. The door opened, and a woman said, "Hello, Jane. I'm so sorry I've kept you waiting." Chapter 7. The intercom buzzed. Who could need him at 11 on a Saturday morning? "Hello," he answered. "Hi, Richard, it's Annabelle Carter. I wonder if it would be okay for me to come up." Annabelle. Richard realized he hadn't heard from any of the Carters in almost 2 years. His first thought was to come up with an excuse, but he chose to be polite instead. "Of course," he said. She stood in the doorway, looking a little older, but not much. Her posture was the same as always, straight and proud, with her chin slightly lifted as if looking down at everyone. Richard had never felt that pride directed at him. Her hair was pulled back into the tight bun she always wore. She wore more makeup than he remembered, trying to hide the signs of a few extra years. But what caught his attention was the pushchair. Inside it was a small child, maybe 18 months old or close to 2. It was hard to tell. "Come in," Richard said, forcing a smile that felt uncomfortable on his face. "And who's this?" Once the door was shut, Annabelle quickly unbuckled the harness. The child squirmed out at once and pointed at the television. "Not now, Stephen," she said briskly. "Nana needs to talk to Mr. Thompson." Stephen made a small huff that sounded surprisingly grown-up. "Please have a seat," Richard said. "It's been a while. Do you want tea or coffee?" They sat facing each other with cups in between them. Stephen sat on Annabelle's lap, focused on a book with cartoon animals in it. "Richard," she said after some time, "I'm sorry for coming by without notice. Terrence is at a game and I had a little time to spare, but something has been on my mind." "Oh," Richard responded, beginning to feel anxious. "Yes." She hesitated for a moment, then waved her hand as if to brush away her doubts. "I'll get straight to the point. Why haven't you reached out to see Stephen?" She looked down at the boy and then back at Richard, as if he should already know the answer. "Despite everything Jane did," she added, "or at least what I believe she did, I'm surprised you haven't shown any interest in your son." Richard felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Richard felt light as a feather, his shock clear on his face. "I'm sorry," he finally said, rubbing his forehead. "Are you saying that Stephen is my son?" "Of course," Annabelle responded, a hint of annoyance in her tone, as if his question was a bit silly. "I was here when Jane dropped the letter in your mailbox downstairs. She said she explained everything." "What letter?" Richard asked, confused. Annabelle frowned. "The one she wrote when she found out she was having a baby," she explained. "The one saying the child was yours and what she wanted you to know." Richard looked at her in disbelief. "I never got a letter." Annabelle's face softened, not with worry, but with thoughtfulness. "Oh," she said softly. "Why didn't she come to see me or send an email or text?" Richard asked, puzzled. "She didn't want any drama," Annabelle replied, "and she didn't want you to have the chance to turn her down." She glanced at him with a touch of guilt. "And I thought a letter would be better, more personal, that you would like it more." The next 45 minutes were some of the most unusual of Richard's life. He had a son he never knew about. Nearly 10 years of thinking about his life, about what he would leave behind, and if he would ever have the chance to guide a child. All of this had come to him from a dishonest wife and a meddling grandmother, a year and a half too late. When Richard tried to talk to Stephen, the boy seemed fearless with him. He laughed as Richard picked him up and spun him around. Annabelle watched, pleased. "He knows your face. We've had a picture of you around him," she said, making Richard feel a mix of gratitude and surprise. Richard sat back at the table and Stephen waddled over to him, arms raised. "Up," he said with determination. Richard agreed and lifted the boy onto his knee, watching as Stephen tried to reach for the salt shaker on the table. "Annabelle, I need to be honest with you. Jane told me many things that weren't true, especially at the end of our marriage. I hope she was honest most of the time, but I don't really know. Can you show me proof that Stephen is who you say he is?" Annabelle looked at him with understanding in her kind eyes. "I really don't know where that letter went. It had the DNA results and everything, but I understand your concerns. We have a copy at home, but if you don't trust Jane, it might be best if you get him tested just for your own peace of mind. That would make sense given the situation. I'd be happy to help cover the costs too. I mean, I think he resembles you and he has a sweet personality. Also, don't forget, his mother made a tough choice to leave him with her parents so he could be with his father." She gently touched the boy's cheek. Stephen had stopped reaching for the salt and was now playing with a button on Richard's shirt. Richard realized that Annabelle had just given him a big compliment, even if it was indirectly. Then his thoughts turned to practical matters. "We need to focus on what needs to be done," he said, more to himself than to Annabelle, but she nodded in support. "If he is who you say he is, then of course, I would like Stephen to live with me here one day." He noticed Annabelle nodded in agreement, which was a relief. "But we need to do it right. The apartment is not suitable for an 18-month-old at all, and I need to get that sorted. Would you be willing to keep him just a little longer so I can make this place safe for Stephen?" At this point, Stephen had managed to unbutton his shirt and laughed happily. His small fingers reached for the button, seemingly curious about whether it could be food or something else. Richard calmly took the button and hid it in his pocket, causing Stephen to throw a little fit that both Richard and his grandmother watched fondly. Stephen did look like him. Annabelle was right, but that did not mean much until he found out the truth. "Can you tell me about Stephen's mother?" Richard asked. "How is she doing?" Annabelle briefly lifted her eyes from where Stephen played with his toys. "There's not much to say," she replied. "She's busy and doing well, no men if that's what you're wondering. At least she hasn't mentioned anyone. We've visited her a few times. She's going through treatment and therapy." At the word therapy, Annabelle almost rolled her eyes but stopped herself just in time. Clearly, the idea of sharing personal struggles with a stranger bothered her. "She has changed quite a bit," Annabelle continued. "You would recognize her, but she looks different, softer. She has gained a little weight, not too much, but she resembles me more now." She made a vague gesture toward her hips, which were not large but definitely feminine. "It must be that awful American diet," she added with a hint of disdain. Richard sensed a slight satisfaction in her tone. His anger towards Jane had faded some, but it was still there. He still didn't trust her completely as a partner, but if Stephen was in his life, Jane would also be around, even if only a little. This would be true whenever she returned from the United States. "Is she coming back soon?" he asked. Annabelle didn't try to read into his words, and he appreciated that. "She's not sure," she replied. "At least that was her answer the last time we talked. She mentioned making progress. I took that to mean in her job, but she's smart. She's built a good team there and they are making money, or so Terrence tells me." Just then, Annabelle's phone rang, playing the familiar tune from Ride of the Valkyries. Richard bit his lip to stop a laugh. Stephen looked up, clearly knowing the sound. "Can I answer this?" Annabelle asked, always polite as if she needed permission. "I think it's Terrence." Richard nodded and crouched down to playfully tickle Stephen. The boy burst out laughing. "Hello, dear," Annabelle greeted cheerfully. "No, I'm at Richard's." "I'm introducing him to Stephen." There was a long pause on the line, filled with muffled sounds from Terrence that lasted about 20 seconds. He seemed irritated. Annabelle stayed calm. "No, he didn't get the letter, that's why, so you can relax." She listened for a moment. "Yes, of course he's the father, you can tell just by looking at him. But I told him you'd be okay with paying for another test just to ease his mind." She shot Richard a wink. Although he always got along well with Jane's mother, it felt like Annabelle was hinting at something new between them. Suddenly, Terrence's tone became softer. "Okay, I will meet you there in 10 minutes. I love you." She hung up and put her phone back in her bag as if nothing special had happened. Richard helped pick up the usual mess that came with having a toddler, placing everything in the basket under the stroller while Annabelle secured Stephen in his seat. "Should I come by tomorrow?" Annabelle asked at the door. "I'd like that," Richard replied. "Thank you." Once the door was closed, Richard headed into the kitchen and opened the drawer where he kept letters, bills, and the clutter of adult life. He looked through it slowly, knowing what he was searching for but also knowing it wouldn't be there. When he shut the drawer, he felt no surprise. Chapter 8, the last 2 years had been the hardest for Jane. Starting a new office, trying to show a new group of people that a British advisor could help with their savings, and facing the polite doubt many Americans had about foreign expertise. All of this happened while she fought her private battle to find peace within herself. If she were honest, the word difficult hardly described it. Some days, or even stretches of days, she felt so worn down from hormone changes that it was hard to move, with pain coursing through her body in ways she could hardly explain. While her body longed for connection, her determination stayed strong. On the toughest days, her father managed the New York business from London, with Jane feeling like just a name on a piece of paper and a face on a screen. Terrence was understanding in his own way. He didn't fully grasp what she was going through, but he made exceptions for her, thinking she was experiencing early menopause, and showed the same patience he had shown Annabelle years ago. No one corrected him. Only Freya and the trusted doctors knew the truth. Richard may have read her letter, but she feared he might think she was lying again. Freya had become more than just a doctor to Jane. Her deep knowledge of hormones was matched by her caring nature. She stayed by Jane's side during the toughest times, helping her understand what was happening. Gradually, Jane felt better. There were tough days filled with pain and moments when Jane called Freya in tears, fearing that her struggles would return. But Freya was always there for her. One day, she mentioned that Jane's case was unlike any she had seen before and asked if she could write about it anonymously. Jane agreed, wanting to help others who might be in the same situation. As Jane's hormone levels changed, her body also transformed. She noticed changes that reminded her of her mother when she was younger. Her monthly cycles became more noticeable, and she laughed with Freya about experiencing symptoms she had never felt before. It seemed like a small sacrifice after everything she had gone through. However, not everything was easy. During a meeting, she was shocked to realize her body was reacting in a way she had hoped for in the past. Panic turned to comfort when Freya explained that it just meant there were still adjustments to make, and everything was manageable. The biggest surprise came one morning when Jane woke up feeling different. She noticed a lack of desire, and the thought of intimacy felt distant. Freya reassured her that this was normal for that time in her cycle and that her body was adjusting well. Jane held onto the word Freya used, normal. Freya helped her understand why trying to have a baby with Richard had been so difficult in the past. Jane was very sensitive to changes in her hormones. Without the help of her pill, it was surprising that she managed at all. What shocked Freya most was not that Jane had faced struggles, but that she had succeeded while still on the pill. Given Jane's hormone situation back then, it was expected that she would face early loss or, at best, an early delivery. The fact that she carried Stephen to term without any medical help was something Freya never thought would happen. Going to therapy helped too. It wasn't about confessing, but more about learning to live in a body that felt different. Freya had warned her about grief and anxiety, and both came in waves. Yet Jane held on to the hope that this pain was leading her to a better place, a life without lies. She often thought about Richard and what they might say to each other if they ever got the chance to talk again. Stephen should have been a connection between them. Leaving her son was the hardest thing she had ever done. Freya once said that if Jane tried to leave him now, she wouldn't be able to. Her body was urging her to protect him, to stay, and to return home, and the feeling of wanting to be home grew stronger. Emotions came unexpectedly. Tears flowed easily now without any planning. She cried while watching movies, listening to music, and seeing Stephen asleep on a video call, with her mother holding the tablet above him. And Richard, she cried about him the most. She thought about what she had taken from him and the lies she had told to hide a secret that no longer mattered once he let her go. The tears she hadn't cried back then came rushing out now, like they had built up and arrived all at once. Freya and her father decided she would go back to London. She held her case study closely in her hand luggage, wrapped carefully just in case Richard still didn't believe her. She had learned that he never got the letter. Annabelle had confirmed this, sounding upset during one of their calls. However, returning as someone new, with her story finally finished, might actually help her. Freya had been open about the situation with Jane. Jane would need daily injections under her skin for a long time, probably until she got older, unless she wanted to face serious risks. Freya had warned that these risks could be very harmful, both physically and mentally. There was no clear guide for them. Jane's health issues were quite severe, even by medical standards. Pregnancy would make everything more complicated. The medication doses would need to be changed often, and there were no guarantees on the results. Freya also mentioned that a doctor in Cambridge had been consulted throughout Jane's treatment and would continue to be available if needed. In any case, Freya said lightly, she and her husband would be in England in a couple of months. As Jane walked through the gate, she spotted her parents waiting with Stephen. He was in his stroller, focused on the stream of people coming out of the tunnel, looking surprised. Jane rushed the last few steps, knelt down, and gently took his face in her hands, kissing him as if she might never see him again. Stephen was surprised and lightly pushed her away. Jane laughed, feeling relieved, and stood up, wrapping her arms around her parents. Richard sat under his reading light, finishing a case study that Annabelle had given him earlier that day. She had asked him to read it and agree to meet Jane later. This meeting was not for making up, she had said, but for finding some closure instead. His son, Stephen, was asleep in the bedroom, a small night light glowing softly at the door. Stephen was getting old enough to call out for him with a joyful "Daddy." There had never been anything in Richard's life that made him as happy as that sound. He closed the cover of the document and shut his eyes. It was hard to believe that the woman he had chosen to marry had been dealing with something that affected both their lives in such a big way. It still made him feel a little upset, but the study showed that the physical and emotional pain Jane faced daily was beyond what most people could understand. In a way, knowing how serious her struggles were made it easier to forgive her. It wasn't just for pleasure or cruelty. She needed help to get through each day. The study indicated that being close to an emotional partner did not change the need for support Jane felt. It was a psychological issue, a way to cope layered on top of a medical condition. The report mentioned Jane working with a psychologist to help manage her worries and sadness while her treatment was being adjusted. There were also old photographs of Jane, her face blurred, taken to show the changes in her condition as her treatment continued. Richard noticed the changes in her appearance, described plainly in the text. His body reacted without thinking to both versions of her, the woman she used to be and the woman she was now. Either way, she was lovely, though it felt strange to accept that the firmer figure he remembered was gone. Near the end, a short note mentioned that she had chosen not to go through the suggested surgery for personal reasons and her partner's feelings. Richard chuckled softly. The cherry on top of a dessert was safe, at least, even if he never saw it again. Chapter 9. The cafe was lively, but Richard easily found a table for two. Stephen, as he often was during the day, was comfortably in his grandmother's arms. He called her Annabonk, which made everyone smile, especially Annabelle. Richard waited patiently for Jane, his guest. He wasn't as nervous as he thought he'd be, though it would be untrue to say he had no worries at all. He had dealt with enough of those feelings. He spotted her before she saw him. She walked into the cafe casually, wearing a mohair trench coat that hugged her waist. Her figure had changed, with softer curves that were noticeable but not overdone. This was simply how she looked now. She was still tall, which hadn't changed, and instead of high heels, she wore sensible ankle boots with blue jeans. The most noticeable difference was her lighter skin. She was paler than he had ever seen her, and it suited her well. A gentle pink touched her cheeks instead of the deep flush she used to claim she was hiding. Richard now understood what that color had really been. He stood and waved to get her attention. She paused when she saw him, just for a moment, then smiled back at him. Even from a few feet away, he could see the tears forming in her eyes, almost ruining her makeup. It was something he had never noticed in her before. It softened her, making her look more in touch with her feelings. It seemed like the woman he had known before had never been able to show what she truly felt. "Hi, Jane," Richard said, leaning forward to give her a friendly kiss on the cheek. He was careful, not trying to flirt. "Hi, Richard," she replied. She looked genuinely happy, though a bit anxious too. "You look good. Still running?" Richard laughed lightly. "A bit more gray in my hair, I think, but yes, I jog with Stephen in his stroller now. There's a nice group of moms and me on Wednesday mornings. You, on the other hand. Wow, what a change. Thank you." She paused for a moment. "But I know you liked me the way I was, so I feel nervous about how you see me now." "Don't fish for compliments," he said gently. "You look good, not the same as before, but I've read Dr. Reynolds' case study. I know how hard your journey has been to deal with your illness." He asked the last part softly. The study hadn't clearly defined it, just referring to the need, a term he didn't want to use. Jane didn't argue about the word, which was a relief. He could see she was preparing for something tough to say. "I want to say this," she said quietly. "Illness or not, I made choices. I hurt people, you especially. I lied to you many times. Most of the time by not saying things, but sometimes on purpose. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forget, but I hope that maybe one day you can forgive me." Richard looked at her calmly. "One day, maybe," he said. Jane nodded. It was likely the most she could hope for. "Do you ever think," she asked, her eyes filling with tears again, "that we might return to how we used to be?" It felt strange to see her like this. The gentle curves of her face were the same, but her expressions felt new. All the feelings he had relied on before seemed lost. He realized he would need to understand her all over again. Richard let out a slow breath. "To be honest, I don't think so." Jane turned away as tears started to fall. He gathered himself and continued. "It comes down to trust. You faced a challenge, something that might have stopped us from getting married. I read about it. You didn't love me when we wed, not in the way I thought love was. I was there for show, nothing more. I believe you learned to love me later for who I am, but I never got that chance. I loved the person you pretended to be, not the true you, and that hurts. It's a loss of trust from the person you should trust the most. Jane sobbed openly now, but she nodded as she understood his words. Richard reached for her hand, noticing her engagement and wedding ring still on her finger. I would have helped you, he said gently. I would have done anything I could to support you in becoming who you are today, but you didn't trust me enough to let me in. That hurt runs so deep that I don't think I could ever put myself in that place again. Jane nodded, tears still flowing. With shaky breaths, she responded, I don't blame you. I doubt I'd do any differently if I were in your shoes. Then she laughed lightly, like people do when they're feeling overwhelmed. All this crying, she said, wiping her eyes with a napkin. I'm not used to it. No, Richard replied with a sad smile. I guess you're not. They sat quietly for a few moments, sipping their drinks. Jane looked closely at Richard. He hadn't really changed at all. He sat in his usual spot, watching the little world spinning around him in the cafe. Should we talk about Stephen? Jane asked carefully. Of course, Richard replied, a warm smile spreading across his face. He means the world to me. I still don't know what happened to the letter you sent, but I believe you sent it. There's no way your mother would have lied about that. Thank you. I'm sorry. If I had known... Jane stopped, taking a few deep breaths, trying to steady herself. I would have told her to reach out to you sooner. I thought you didn't want to know. Or that you didn't believe me and wouldn't be ready to learn. Richard held back a sharp response. Jane knew how he felt about children. He would have done anything to find a child of his, no matter who the mother was. Well, he finally said, I'm sorry for missing so much, but you missed things too. I'd much rather we take care of Stephen as friends than end up in a legal battle over custody, if that's possible. He looked at her. Jane shifted in her chair and sat up straighter. Though she had changed in many ways, she still took on the same serious posture she had learned from her father when it came to negotiations. It just looked different on her now. I've been thinking, she started. A lot. It was almost too easy for me to leave him with my mom when I went to New York. I couldn't do that now. Would you be okay with me moving back into my flat in the building? Our front doors are less than 50 feet apart. We wouldn't be living together, but it would make co-parenting much easier. She looked at him with hope. Richard sighed slowly. Well, it's your flat. I can't stop you, and I see the benefits of being so close. The main problem is me, he said with a shrug. I would see you every day, sometimes by chance not planned. Knowing you were so close would be hard for me. He smiled a little. See, I haven't really moved on from you. Jane felt a warm flush on her cheeks, and Richard noticed he was still softly holding her hand. He let go and moved his hand back to rest next to his coffee cup. That makes me happy, Jane said quietly, smiling. But I get how you feel. It's really your choice. I can wait. I have a child to co-parent and plenty of time for that. Richard looked up, surprised. Before you ask, she added, sensing his question, no, I haven't left for good. I'm still part of it. I'm still on the board, but I won't be giving advice anymore. I just want to focus on being a mom. She laughed, lightly but sincerely. Another change. They exchanged smiles. Why don't we give this a try, Richard said. If it ever gets to be too much for me, I'll let you know. I wouldn't expect anything less, Jane replied, and I promise I'll do the same. You must tell me to stop if anything makes you uncomfortable. I know this is unusual, but I'm the one changing things now. I want to do it your way. She paused and added gently, so you set the rules, I'll follow them. Stephen's schedules, bedtimes, what food he can have, all of it, your rules. Chapter 10, Phase 3 of their joined lives started quietly. They were helpful to one another. It felt normal and entirely friendly. Stephen was never a burden, but the reason they stayed close. They had dinner together most evenings, either at one place or the other, with no strict routines. Flexibility helped them make this new arrangement work. The main thing was that Stephen came first. Jane's apartment changed. The bright white walls that Jane liked when she moved in changed to warmer shades. Rugs appeared, along with cozy furniture that made the place feel welcoming, covering the plain gray carpet. A houseplant stood in the corner, still tall but a bit scraggly after all these years. Jane would not hear of replacing it. She said it had sentimental value, sharing a look with Richard that hinted at her difficulty in letting go of more than just the plant. Most evenings, Whichever parent Stephen was with would let the other help get him ready for bed. At nearly 2 years old, it was no longer a tiring task. Afterwards, they might watch a movie or a show they both liked, just to have someone to talk with. They often sat at opposite ends of the couch and rarely touched. Eventually, one would yawn or find an excuse to leave, heading to their own flat to rest. One night, Richard dozed off during a movie. He woke up in the early morning to find a blanket over him. He felt annoyed with himself as he slipped out to return to his flat. Despite trying to move on, Richard found old feelings resurfacing for Jane, the woman his ex-wife had become. Jane was a caring mother and clearly still cared for him. He kept a distance to protect himself and, more importantly, to shield Stephen from any trouble. He believed it was for the best. It was the right choice. But it felt tiring. Jane noticed the space between them. Richard seldom talked with her about anything other than Stephen or their shared interests in movies. One night, after he dozed off during a film, she found herself watching him for a long time. The outline under the blanket made it clear he was asleep. Eventually, she tucked him in more snugly and went to bed, softly saying that she loved him as she walked away. Since Stephen was born, she hadn't shared any romantic moments with anyone, but she was okay with that. She was surprised to realize that she only desired closeness with someone she loved or who loved her back. Freya laughed when Jane brought it up and reminded her that wanting companionship wasn't a bad thing. Jane smiled but didn't respond. Freya, despite her intelligence, didn't fully understand her feelings. Over time, it became obvious that no matter what Richard felt, be it love, anger, or something else, he wouldn't take any steps toward more closeness. Their relationship would stay as it was, co-parents and not something deeper. Jane reminded herself of this every day. Each time she saw him, and every night when she lay alone in bed, her thoughts wandered to dreams of them together, followed by tears she struggled to contain. Although the strong feelings weren't at the forefront anymore, they still lingered, unresolved. She knew she had no right to pressure him. Pushing for more could disrupt the delicate relationship they had built for Stephen's sake, and she wouldn't risk that. While Jane had stepped back at Cum, attending meetings only occasionally to support her father in his efforts to gain more for everyone, there was one event he insisted she attend: a financial services gala at the Dorchester. Even if she felt unnoticed, her name still held significance. The business would eventually belong to her, even though she had already decided to sell it if she could convince her father to agree. Stephen and Richard were on the living room floor. Richard was explaining the differences between variables in Python and Java, while Stephen excitedly banged on an old laptop with a plastic toy hammer. Jane walked in and felt proud when she saw Richard's immediate reaction to her appearance. She admitted to herself that she had put in a lot of effort for him, not to force anything or to control him, but simply because she wanted to, and Richard's look made all her preparation worthwhile. Her hair was styled up loosely, with curls falling to frame her face. Her makeup was neat and natural, just the way Annabelle would have liked. The gown was a shining green, designed to hang off one shoulder, gently highlighting her figure. A warm faux fur cape rested over her shoulders, and she held a pair of white opera gloves. She must have been wearing heels because when Richard stood to greet her, she could finally look him in the eye for the first time since they had reunited. This alone made him feel something he didn't want to acknowledge. "You look beautiful," Richard said, wishing his voice didn't give away his feelings. She truly did. The dress showed off her lovely shape, and his thoughts briefly wandered in ways he wished they wouldn't. He scolded himself silently as he felt a change. Jane blushed, gave a little spin, and finished with a playful bow. "Thank you. Come and give Mummy a kiss, darling," she called to her son. Stephen had moved on from exploring the laptop to tapping the S key over and over again. He got up and walked over. Richard picked him up so Jane could kiss his cheek. "I'll be home late," she said as she headed for the door. "Probably not after 2, though. I don't think I can handle these shoes for much longer. It's been a while." "Have fun," Richard replied. Later, Richard found he couldn't sleep. After 3, he quietly got out of bed and checked on Stephen, who was sound asleep, mouth open, breathing just like Richard did, or so he had always been told. He went to the kitchen and wondered if Jane was back. He had a key to her flat. He could easily step across the hall and see. The idea came easily, but he pushed it aside quickly. That would be crossing a line. Her home was just that, hers, and it wasn't right to go inside just to ease his curiosity. That thought troubled him. Once again, he realized he didn't fully trust her. He still felt the need to check on what she told him, and this made him very sad. Jane hadn't come home by 2 or even 3 when he might have sneaked a look. She arrived later looking sorry and wearing some of her mother's clothes, smart black pants that ended just above her ankles and a crisp white shirt that fit her well. She still wore the heels, silver and strappy, which were hidden under her dress the night before. Her feet were much larger than her mother's. "I'm sorry, I should have texted." Mom and Dad were already in the car, and I was half asleep by the time we got back. Her apology seemed genuine. Richard responded simply, "I don't really have any say or expectation. Your life is your own." It would have been good to know for Stephen, but it is what it is. On Monday, Stephen was at Jane's apartment while Richard worked from home. Just before 5, he received a message. "Tomby, hi there, got a moment?" "Rich T, yes, what's up?" "Tomby, you can tell me to back off if you want. I know you and Jane have this. Odd situation, so I'm not sure if this helps or not. I'd want to know, but you know how I am." "Rich T, what are you talking about?" "Tomby, this." A link appeared. It led to a private social media page that Tom had somehow found and was sharing. There were pictures from the gala Jane had attended. First, there were photos of Terrence and Annabelle shaking hands with various people, smiling happily. Some faces looked familiar, but most did not. Then Richard saw Jane. She was standing next to a man. They were close. His arm was around her shoulders and hers was around his waist. He was very good-looking. He had dark hair, dark eyes, and was tall, at least 6'2". They were both smiling at the camera. Richard saved the image and kept looking. There were more. Further down, there was a short video. Jane was dancing with him, her head resting on his shoulder, her arms around his neck, while his hands rested comfortably at her waist. Richard tried not to feel jealous, but it was hard. She had lied to him, saying she was at her parents' house, and then she showed up the next morning in her mother's clothes. People don't change easily. Jane certainly hadn't. Lies were her way of dealing with things. "Richty, thanks, friend. I didn't know she was with someone. How did you find out?" "Tomby, I can tell you if you really want, but I'd suggest you don't ask." If it helps, the guy's name is Matthew Fairchild. He seems to be very good at business, worth a lot of money, it seemed. He was called the most desirable single man in the city. "Great, right, well, thanks I guess," Rich said. "I wonder what you'd do to me if you were my enemy instead of my friend." "Sorry, it's just how I am. I don't think any of them are worth it," Tom replied. Jane was counting with Stephen. 144 is called a gross, she said. Stephen looked at her, confused. 12 times 12 seemed too much for a 2-year-old. Jane felt a bit lost, too. Dancing with Matthew had not been a good choice. She hadn't liked it at all. She only did it because her father mentioned that Matthew asked about her and might invest a lot of money with them. Seeing the photos and video of herself looking happy in Matthew's arms made her feel uneasy. To make things worse, Terrence said there might be a story in one of the monthly magazines. Had the most eligible businessman in Britain finally found his perfect partner? He seemed excited about it. This could be good for Cum, but Jane worried about how Richard would feel if he found out. She believed he would manage any jealousy without taking it out on her, but he might think she had lied about staying at her parents' house, even though she hadn't. Matthew was good-looking, tall, and stylish. He also had a strong sense of his own importance, which was a big turnoff for her. Even if he hadn't, she had made her rule, Richard or no one. As long as Richard was not remarried, she wouldn't consider another man. Not long after, Annabelle came by. She took Stephen out for his usual baby chino and picked up the clothes Jane had borrowed. At about 5:30, there was a sharp knock at the door. It sounded serious. Jane opened it and saw Richard standing there, his face tight and unreadable. He already knew. She could see it at once. She asked him to come inside, but he said no. Annabelle had Stephen and would bring him back later, and he was aware of that. He spoke in a flat voice. He said he did not care about the dancing. He did not care who the man was. He did not care what she chose to do. What he cared about was the lie. He said the lie hurt more than anything else. Even now, he said, the only thing she owed him was the truth about their son. Then he turned away and walked down the hall toward his own door. Jane hurried after him, still wearing only her socks. The rough carpet hurt her feet, but she did not slow down. She called his name and begged him to stop. She said it was not what it looked like. His door closed just as she reached it. She knocked on it weakly, already crying. She told him she had gone to her parents' house. She said they would confirm it. She explained that the man and the event were for work, something her father advised. She said nothing else happened. She did not go anywhere with him. She repeated that she went straight to her parents. She swore it was the truth. The door opened. Richard still looked angry, but he listened. He pulled her inside and closed the door. He asked how she could swear such a thing. The room went quiet. The anger and fear between them filled the space. What followed was not gentle, but it was not planned either. It was driven by pain, relief, and long-held feelings. Jane felt overwhelmed, as if something heavy had finally been lifted. She had believed she would have to live without this closeness forever, and now it came back all at once. "Get your hands away from that," he growled. "That's mine." He pulled away suddenly and turned her around, looking down as if he had missed seeing her. "I've missed you," he said, talking more to the moment than to her. His fingers brushed down the sides, making her shiver. "Whose is it?" he asked, his voice still rough with emotion. "Yours," she whispered. "Always, please, hold me again." Later, tired and close, they lay together in Richard's bed. Jane rested her head on his shoulder, tears quietly falling. "I didn't think I would ever be this close to you again," she said, her voice shaky. Richard took a deep breath. "I need you to know something," he said. "This isn't about forgiveness. It's not about trusting you again." She nodded, trying to hold back her feelings. "I understand. I don't want a relationship," he continued. "I don't want to start over." Jane gave a small smile. "I'm not asking you to." He looked at her, searching her face for honesty. "If this feels like more than it should, I'll stop." "Then I'll stop too," she said quickly. "I won't try to change your mind." The intercom buzzed and they both jumped out of bed. Stephen had returned. Chapter 11, Stephen watched his father and mother laugh at something on Jane's phone. At 16, he knew that his family was unique. They lived in two separate flats that weren't even next to each other. It kept things interesting. He had asked his dad years ago why he and Mum weren't married. His father had laughed and said they had tried it, but it hadn't worked. Stephen accepted that answer and didn't think much more about it. Over the last couple of years, he had met many kids whose parents were divorced or, in some cases, openly with others. His life, despite its quirks, seemed pretty normal compared to others. Regardless of what their relationship was like, they were often very close, which could be hard to listen to. Usually, he turned up his headphones or went to the other apartment, which was a nice escape. He grabbed one of his cricket bats and practiced his swings in front of the mirror. He loved cricket. Uncle Tom had spent hours training him when he was younger, even though he had tried to get him interested in football first. Stephen was a part of the Middlesex cricket team for young players and had played with the under-18 group that summer. He was the youngest by far, but already as tall as most adults and stronger than his teammates. He had a great batting average, thanks in part to a few games where he didn't get out, and his bowling was improving too. There was talk about him possibly playing in another team near the end of the season if he kept performing well. "Stephen," his dad called. "Tom will be here soon." "Are you ready to help with the couch?" Stephen walked into the living room and found his sister, Jody, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, looking upset. "Hey, Jodes, are you okay?" he asked. "Not really," the 13-year-old said. "I don't want them to get rid of it. I'll miss it." She lay back and gently touched the couch as if trying to comfort it. The couch made a creaking noise under her. Jody was quite similar to him, tall and strong for her age, although she had light hair while he had dark. Over the past year, Stephen had noticed that their mom seemed very worried about Jody. He didn't know the reason, only that she had been taking Jody to appointments in Cambridge almost every month since she had grown up a bit. When he asked, Mum had mentioned something about blood tests. Dad had told me that Mum had a problem when she was young and wanted to be sure Jody didn't have the same one. He knew Jody was well liked at school. Boys were always finding reasons to be around her. One lunchtime, he had to step in and make it clear that she was not available. She was only 13. Even as her brother, he could see that she had something that attracted his friends. They couldn't explain it when he asked. Dad had simply said, "Hormones." Despite that, Jody had broken every school athletics record in 8th grade and even knocked over a 10th grader during a game of football. Stephen had laughed then, but now he felt uneasy, wondering if Mum's worries and Jody's talents were somehow connected. 6 months earlier, Mum had flown her friend Freya over to visit Jody. Stephen knew Freya was a doctor, but when he asked about it, he was told it was private. He shrugged it off then, but later wished he had pushed harder, thinking he could have helped if they had let him. Instead, he daydreamed about scoring big runs at Lord's, which he could see from his bedroom window. Dad had been going through something recently. Stephen knew he was now older than his father had been when he passed away, and that seemed to weigh on him. Dad was very healthy. They often ran together in the early mornings, which Stephen enjoyed, especially now that he could easily keep up with him. Jody rushed off with a quick "see ya," "save the couch," and a playful fist in the air. Granddad and Annabonk arrived to take her to a gymkhana where she usually won. Finally, Tom showed up. The first thing he did was put a thumb drive into Stephen's pocket and told him not to tell his dad about it. As Tom walked into the kitchen to greet Stephen's parents, he called back, "Get the cushions off and see if the old sofa has any money." Stephen piled the cushions by the door and reached into the space where the back of the sofa met the seat. He found mostly dust and lint. Then he felt something hard. He paused for a moment, then pulled it out. It was an envelope, slightly yellow from age and still sealed. He flipped it over and saw his mother's handwriting that said, "My darling Richard." Stephen smiled to himself and tucked it into his pocket, already imagining it as an amusing letter to read later and a fun way to tease his parents.